The morning mist hung thick over the mountains like a gray blanket. Dr. Maya Rodriguez pulled her jacket tighter as she stepped out of her small medical clinic. 3 years she had been living in this remote corner of northern Myanmar, where the air was thin and the nearest city was a 6-hour drive on dangerous mountain roads. Most people back home thought she was crazy for leaving her comfortable job in California to work in such an isolated place. But Maya found peace here among the rolling hills and scattered villages. The work was hard, but it felt real in a way that her old life never had. Every day brought new challenges, and every patient she helped made the long journey worthwhile. This particular Wednesday started like any other. Maya needed to make her weekly trip to the village market to buy medical supplies and food. The local traders brought goods up from the bigger towns, and it was her only chance to get what she needed. She had learned to wake up early for these trips because the mountain paths could be dangerous when the afternoon storms rolled in. She loaded her old Jeep with empty bags and started down the winding dirt road. The engine coughed and sputtered. The thin mountain air was hard on vehicles, but this old truck had been reliable for years. As she drove, Maya enjoyed the quiet beauty of the landscape. Tall pine trees lined the road, and occasionally she could catch glimpses of the valley far below through breaks in the forest. About halfway to the village, Maya heard something that made her slam on the brakes. Over the sound of her engine, she could hear what sounded like someone moaning in pain. She turned off the engine and listened carefully. There it was again, definitely human, and coming from somewhere off the road, Maya grabbed her medical bag from the back seat. She always carried it everywhere, a habit from her early days when emergencies could happen anywhere at any time. The sound seemed to be coming from a steep ravine that dropped away from the road. She peered over the edge, trying to see through the thick bush and vines that grew down the slope. "Hello?" she called out in Burmese, one of the local languages. She had learned, "Is someone there?" The moaning got louder, more urgent. Maya could tell someone was definitely down there and in serious trouble. Without hesitation, she began climbing down the rocky slope, using tree branches to keep her balance. The vegetation was thick and thorny, catching at her clothes and scratching her arms. As she pushed through a curtain of hanging vines, Maya gasped at what she saw. A man lay crumpled against a large boulder, barely conscious. But this wasn't like any of the local villagers she knew. He wore clothing she had never seen before, hand-woven fabric with intricate patterns in deep blues and reds. His pants were made of thick, durable material that looked like it was designed for mountain hunting or traveling. The man's condition was terrible. His face was flushed with fever, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool morning air. Angry. Red wounds covered his arms and legs. Some looked like cuts from thorns or rocks, but others appeared to be infected animal bites. His breathing was shallow and rapid, and when Maya checked his pulse, his heart was racing dangerously fast. What struck her most were the intricate tattoos covering his visible skin. They weren't random designs, but seemed to tell a story. Spirals and geometric patterns that looked ancient, mixed with images of animals and symbols she didn't recognize. Around his neck hung a pendant made of green stone that caught the filtered sunlight streaming through the forest canopy. Maya tried speaking to him in Burmese, then in Thai, then in the little bit of Mandarin she knew. The man's eyes fluttered, open at the sound of her voice, but his response was in a language completely foreign to her. The words had a musical quality, with sounds and rhythms unlike anything she had heard in her 3 years in the region. She realized she was looking at someone from one of the deep mountain tribes, communities so remote that they had little contact with the outside world. Maya had heard stories about these groups from some of the older villagers, but she had never expected to encounter someone from such an isolated culture. The man was trying to say something, his voice weak but insistent. He kept pointing toward the higher mountains and repeating what sounded like names. Maya could see the worry in his eyes. He was concerned about someone or something, probably his family or his people. But right now, the most important thing was getting him medical help before his condition got worse. Maya climbed back up to the road and drove quickly to the nearest village. She found 2 young men who were willing to help and had them follow her back to the ravine. Together, they carefully carried the injured stranger up the steep slope and loaded him into her jeep. The whole time, the man drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes mumbling in his unknown language. The drive back to her clinic felt like it took forever. Maya kept checking the rearview mirror, watching the man's breathing, praying he would hold on until she could properly treat him. When they finally arrived, she and her helpers carried him inside and onto her examination table. Maya had treated everything from broken bones to tropical diseases during her time here. But this case was more serious than most. The man's fever was dangerously high to 104 degrees Fahrenheit. His wounds were badly infected, some showing signs of blood poisoning that could be fatal if not treated immediately. She started an IV line to get fluids and antibiotics into his system, then began the careful process of cleaning and treating each wound. As she worked, Maya noticed more details about her mysterious patient. His hands were calloused in ways that suggested he was skilled with tools and weapons. His muscle tone indicated someone who lived an active, physical life in challenging terrain. Everything about him spoke of someone who belonged to a traditional way of life that most of the modern world had forgotten. The man's jade pendant fascinated her. It was carved with incredible skill, depicting what looked like a protective spirit or guardian animal. The stone itself was of exceptional quality, the kind of jade that would be worth a fortune in the art markets of Bangkok or Hong Kong, but Maya could tell this wasn't valuable to him because of money. This was something with deep spiritual or cultural meaning. Working through the night, Maya cleaned wounds, administered medicines, and monitored vital signs. She had learned to work alone during emergencies, but she found herself wishing she had another doctor to consult with. Every decision felt critical. One wrong choice could mean the difference between life and death for this stranger who had somehow ended up in her care. By dawn, the man's fever had started to come down slightly and his breathing had improved. Maya allowed herself a moment of hope. She had done everything medically possible, and now it was up to his body to respond to the treatment. As she sat beside him, watching for any changes in his condition, she wondered about his story. How had he ended up injured and alone so far from his home? What kind of life did he live in those remote mountains? And most importantly, would his people ever know what had happened to him? For the first 3 days, Maya barely left the injured man's side. She had converted her small storage room into a recovery area, moving her extra medical supplies to make space for a proper bed. The man drifted between deep sleep and moments of fevered consciousness, his body fighting the infection that had nearly killed him during those early hours. Maya learned to read the subtle signs of his condition. When his breathing became shallow, she knew his fever was spiking again. When his hands clenched into fists, she could tell he was having nightmares, probably reliving whatever accident had left him injured and lost in the mountains. She kept detailed notes of his progress, checking his temperature every 2 hours and adjusting his medications based on how his body responded. On the morning of the 4th day, something changed. Maya was preparing his medication when she heard a different sound from the recovery room. Instead of the restless moaning that had become familiar, she heard what sounded like actual words. Rushing to his bedside, she found the man's eyes open and focused for the first time since she had found him. He looked around the room with obvious confusion, taking in the medical equipment, the white walls, and Maya's unfamiliar face. When he tried to sit up, she gently pressed him back down, speaking in a soothing voice even though she knew he couldn't understand her words. "Easy, easy," she said in English, then switched to Burmese. "You're safe. You're hurt, but you're getting better." The man stared at her for a long moment, then began speaking rapidly in his tribal language. His voice was weak but urgent, and he kept pointing toward the window that faced the higher mountains. Maya could see the worry in his dark eyes. He was trying to communicate something important about his people. Maya brought paper and a pencil, hoping they could communicate through drawings. The man's hands shook as he took the pencil, but he managed to sketch a rough map showing mountains, a valley, and what looked like a collection of small buildings. He pointed to himself, then to the drawing, then back toward the mountains visible through the window. Understanding dawned on Maya. He was showing her where he came from, trying to explain that his people would be looking for him. She nodded and drew a simple picture of herself finding him in the ravine, then bringing him to the clinic. The man studied her drawing carefully, then looked at her with an expression that seemed to be gratitude mixed with amazement over the next few days. Their communication system became more sophisticated. The man, who had pointed to himself and said what sounded like Ketu, proved to be remarkably intelligent. He quickly picked up basic English words and Maya learned a few phrases in his language. More importantly, they developed a system of gestures and drawings that allowed them to share more complex ideas. Maya discovered that Ketu had been injured during what appeared to be a hunting accident. Through his drawings, she learned that he had been tracking a large animal through the forest when he fell into a hidden pit trap, probably one set by another hunter. The fall had left him with multiple cuts and a serious head injury that had caused him to become disoriented and lost. What fascinated Maya most was Ketu's knowledge of traditional medicine. On his 5th day of recovery, when he was strong enough to walk around the clinic, he began pointing to various plants growing outside her window. Using gestures and simple drawings, he showed her which ones could be used for different medical purposes. One morning, Ketu became very excited when he spotted a particular vine growing near the clinic's entrance. He drew pictures showing how the leaves could be prepared as a tea for stomach problems, then demonstrated the proper way to harvest and dry them. Maya realized she was receiving a master class in herbal medicine from someone whose people had been perfecting these techniques. For centuries, as Ketu grew stronger, he began helping around the clinic without being asked. Maya would find him sweeping the floors, organizing supplies, or sitting with other patients when they came for treatment. He seemed to understand that this was her way of helping people, just as his people had their own healing traditions. The language barrier created some amusing moments. One afternoon, Maya was treating a local farmer's infected cut when Ketu suddenly started speaking urgently in his tribal language, gesturing toward the wound. Maya initially thought he was just curious, but Ketu persisted, pointing to a plant outside and making mixing motions with his hands. Curious, Maya followed him outside and watched as he carefully selected leaves from the plant he had indicated. He crushed them between his fingers, releasing a strong medicinal smell. Through gestures, he showed her how his people would prepare a paste from these leaves to prevent infection. Maya had never seen this particular treatment before, but the plant's properties seemed promising. Together, they prepared the traditional remedy and applied it to the farmer's wound alongside Maya's modern treatment. Over the following days, the cut healed remarkably quickly, showing no signs of the infection that had been starting to develop. Maya made careful notes about the plant and Ketu's preparation method, realizing she was documenting medical knowledge that might be completely unknown to modern science. These shared healing experiences created a bond between Maya and Ketu that went beyond words. She could see the respect in his eyes when he watched her work with patients, using tools and techniques that were foreign to him but clearly effective. In return, Maya found herself amazed by the depth of knowledge that Ketu carried about the natural world around them. One evening, as they sat outside the clinic watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple, Ketu began drawing more elaborate pictures. These weren't medical diagrams or maps, but what appeared to be scenes from his daily life. He drew images of people working together, children playing, and what looked like ceremonies or celebrations. Through these drawings, Maya began to understand that Ketu wasn't just any member of his tribe. The way he drew himself in relation to the other figures suggested he held some position of importance or responsibility. When she pointed to the drawings and then to him with a questioning expression, Ketu seemed to struggle with how to explain his role in a way she would understand. Finally, he drew a picture of an older woman with elaborate facial decorations, then drew lines connecting her to himself and to the other figures in his tribal scenes. Maya realized he was showing her his family relationships. The decorated woman was probably his grandmother or a tribal elder, and Ketu's position in the drawing suggested he might be next in line for some kind of leadership role. This revelation made Maya understand why Ketu seemed so worried about getting back to his people. His absence wasn't just causing concern for his personal safety, it might be creating uncertainty about the tribe's future leadership. She could see the weight of responsibility in his eyes whenever he looked toward the mountains where his people lived. By the end of his second week at the clinic, Ketu was physically strong enough to travel, though Maya worried about sending him back into the wilderness alone. His wounds had healed well and his strength had returned, but the mountains could be dangerous even for someone who knew them well. Still, she could see his growing restlessness and understood that he needed to return to his people soon. The morning Maya dreaded finally arrived. After 2 weeks of recovery, Ketu was strong enough to begin his journey home. She had known this day would come, but somehow she wasn't prepared for how difficult it would be to let him go. Over the past 14 days, he had become more than just a patient. He had become a friend and teacher who had shown her healing methods she never knew existed. Maya woke up early that day to find Ketu already awake, sitting by the window and staring at the distant mountains. His packed belongings sat beside him in a neat bundle, the traditional clothes he had worn when she found him, now clean and mended, along with some supplies she had prepared for his journey. There was something different about his posture that morning, a tension that spoke of both eagerness and reluctance. When he noticed Maya watching him, Ketu stood and walked over to her, using the mixture of gestures, drawings, and broken English they had developed. He made it clear that he needed to leave today. His people would be searching for him, and the longer he stayed away, the more dangerous it became for the search parties they would send into the mountains. Maya had prepared for this moment, but her heart still felt heavy. She had grown accustomed to having Ketu around the clinic, helping with patients and sharing his knowledge of traditional medicine. More than that, she had enjoyed having someone to talk with, even if their conversations required creativity and patience to understand each other. Over breakfast, Maya went through the medical supplies she had prepared for Ketu's journey home. She had packed antibiotics, pain medication, and wound care supplies in a waterproof bag. Using simple drawings and demonstrations, she showed him how to take the medications and care for his wounds if they reopened during the difficult mountain trek ahead. Ketu watched her instructions carefully, nodding to show he understood. But Maya could see something troubling him. Finally, he began drawing pictures on a piece of paper, images of plants and traditional remedies. Through his drawings, he was trying to tell her that his people would want to treat his remaining injuries with their own methods. Once he returned home, Maya realized he was worried about mixing traditional medicine with the modern treatments she had given him. She spent time explaining, through pictures and gestures, that the antibiotics wouldn't interfere with most herbal remedies. She even drew a calendar showing how long he should continue taking the pills, regardless of what other treatments his tribal healers might use. As the morning progressed, several local villagers stopped by the clinic. Word had spread about the mysterious stranger Maya had been caring for, and people were curious to see him before he left. Ketu seemed uncomfortable with the attention at first, but Maya could see him observing how these mountain people lived, comparing their ways with those of his own tribe. One elderly village woman brought tea and started chatting with Maya in Burmese about Ketu's recovery. Even though he couldn't understand the words, Ketu seemed to recognize the universal language of concern and kindness in the woman's voice. He bowed respectfully to her, which delighted the old woman and made her beam with pleasure. Around midday, Maya noticed Ketu becoming more restless. He kept looking toward the mountains and checking the position of the sun in the sky. She realized he was calculating travel time. He needed to leave soon if he wanted to cover significant distance before nightfall. The mountain paths could be treacherous in the dark, especially for someone still recovering from serious injuries. Maya prepared a backpack of supplies for Ketu's journey. Along with the medical supplies, she packed dried food, water purification tablets, and a small camping blanket. She also included a flashlight with extra batteries, though she wasn't sure if Ketu had ever used electric lighting before. When she showed him how it worked, his eyes widened with amazement, and he spent several minutes turning it on and off. Fascinated by the technology, the most difficult part came when Maya tried to give Ketu money for his journey. She had converted some of her savings into local currency, thinking it might help him buy supplies or transportation in the lower villages. But Ketu firmly refused to take the money, shaking his head and pushing it back toward her. Through gestures, he made it clear that his people didn't use money in the way she understood it. Instead, Ketu disappeared outside for nearly an hour. Maya began to worry that he had already left without saying goodbye, but eventually she heard him moving around near the back of the clinic. When she went to investigate, she found him carefully selecting and preparing various plants that grew around her property. Ketu had been busy creating something special. Using his traditional knowledge, he had prepared several different herbal remedies, each carefully wrapped in large leaves and tied with strips of bark. Through drawings, he showed Maya what each preparation was for: one for headaches, another for stomach problems, a third for treating cuts and wounds, but the most elaborate preparation was something he indicated was for her general health and protection. He had combined multiple plants in precise proportions, creating a tea mixture that he demonstrated should be brewed and drunk once each week. The care and precision he put into creating these remedies showed Maya how much thought and traditional knowledge went into his people's medicine dot. As the afternoon sun began to sink lower in the sky, Ketu made his final preparations to leave. Maya walked with him to the edge of the forest where the mountain trails began. Both of them seemed to be struggling with how to say goodbye when they didn't share a common language for expressing complex emotions. Finally, Ketu reached up and began to remove the jade pendant that had hung around his neck since Maya first found him. The green stone caught the afternoon light, revealing intricate carvings that Maya had never been able to examine closely. She could tell this piece of jewelry held enormous cultural and personal significance for Ketu. When he tried to place the pendant around Maya's neck, she gently stopped him. Through gestures and expressions, she tried to communicate that she understood how important the pendant was to him and his people. She couldn't accept something so valuable and meaningful. Ketu seemed to understand her reluctance, but his eyes showed disappointment that he couldn't give her something worthy of what she had done for him. Instead, Ketu carefully took the herbal preparations he had made and arranged them in Maya's hands. He spoke for several minutes in his tribal language, his voice carrying tones of blessing, gratitude, and what sounded like promises. Although Maya couldn't understand the words, the emotion in his voice was unmistakable. Then Ketu did something that surprised Maya completely. He knelt on one knee before her, placed his hands together in front of his chest, and spoke what sounded like a formal prayer or blessing in his native language. The gesture was clearly ceremonial, something with deep cultural meaning that went far beyond a simple thank you. When he stood up, Ketu looked directly into Maya's eyes and spoke a few words that sounded different from his usual tribal language. Maya realized he was trying to speak English, carefully pronouncing words he had been practicing. Life. Never forget. As Ketu disappeared into the forest, following paths that were invisible to Maya, but clearly familiar to him, she stood at the forest edge until she could no longer see any trace of his movement through the trees. The silence that followed felt profound, not just the absence of sound, but the absence of a presence that had filled her clinic and her daily routine for 2 weeks. Walking back to her clinic alone, Maya felt a mixture of emotions she couldn't quite name. She was proud that she had saved a life and helped someone return to his people. But she also felt a deep sadness at losing a friend and teacher who had shown her new ways of understanding the healing arts. 3 weeks had passed since Ketu disappeared into the mountain forest, and Maya had slowly settled back into her regular routine. The clinic felt quieter without him, and she often caught herself looking toward the mountains, wondering if he had made it safely home to his people. She had used the herbal remedies he prepared for her, and to her amazement they worked better than she had expected. The headache tea had helped her through several difficult days, and the wound treatment had proven remarkably effective on a local farmer's injury. That Tuesday morning started like any other. Maya was in her clinic treating 8-year-old Lynn, a village child who had been suffering from a persistent cough and breathing problems. The little girl's mother sat nervously beside the examination table while Maya listened to Lynn's lungs with her stethoscope. The symptoms suggested a respiratory infection that was common during the rainy season, and Naya was explaining the treatment plan when she heard something unusual outside. At first, it sounded like the wind moving through the trees, but there was something different about it. Maya paused in her explanation and listened more carefully. The sound wasn't wind at all. It was the soft whisper of many people moving through the forest, trying to stay quiet but unable to completely mask their presence. Maya's heart began to race. In her 3 years at the remote clinic, unexpected visitors usually meant trouble. Sometimes it was injured travelers, occasionally it was people fleeing from conflicts in neighboring regions. But this sounded like a much larger group than she had ever encountered before. She quickly finished examining Lynn and gave her mother the prescription and instructions, trying to keep her voice calm despite her growing concern after they left. Through the back door, Maya slowly approached the front window of her clinic and carefully peered through the curtains. What she saw made her freeze in complete shock. Moving silently through the forest clearing were dozens of people, men, women, children, and elderly individuals, all wearing the same type of traditional clothing that Ketu had worn. The fabric showed the same intricate patterns and deep colors she remembered, and many of the adults carried carved wooden staffs or wore jewelry made from what appeared to be the same green jade as Ketu's pendant. Maya's mind raced as she tried to process what she was seeing. This had to be Ketu's tribe, but why were they here? Had something happened to him during his journey home? Were they looking for him because he never arrived? Her medical training kicked in, and she began mentally preparing for the possibility that they were bringing her injured people to treat. As the group moved closer to her clinic, Maya could see more details that amazed her. The way they moved through the forest was unlike anything she had ever witnessed. They seemed to flow around trees and rocks like water, making barely any sound despite their numbers. Even the children in the group moved with a grace and awareness of their surroundings that spoke of people who had lived their entire lives in harmony with the wilderness. At the front of the group, Maya spotted a familiar figure that made her heart leap with relief and joy. Ketu was there, walking alongside what appeared to be the group's leaders. He looked healthy and strong, completely recovered from his injuries. But there was something different about his posture and the way others in the group deferred to him. He carried a beautifully carved wooden staff that Maya hadn't seen before, and his clothes were more elaborate than what he had worn during his recovery. Beside Ketu walked an elderly woman who commanded immediate respect from everyone around her. Her gray hair was intricately braided with small pieces of jade and silver, and her face bore traditional tattoos that marked her as someone of great importance. The way she moved, despite her age, showed a strength and dignity that made it clear she was a leader among these people. Maya realized she was witnessing something unprecedented. In all the stories she had heard about the remote mountain tribes, no one had ever described them coming down to visit outsiders. These people lived in isolation, maintaining their traditional ways far from modern civilization. For an entire tribe to travel to her clinic was extraordinary and probably without precedent in the region. As the group approached her clinic, Maya made a quick decision. She stepped out onto her front porch, her hands visible and empty to show she meant no harm. The entire group stopped moving when they saw her, and for a long moment there was complete silence. Maya could feel dozens of eyes studying her, evaluating this outsider who had somehow become connected to their people. Ketu stepped forward and spoke to the elderly woman in their tribal language. Maya could hear her name mentioned several times. In his explanation, the woman listened carefully, occasionally nodding or asking what sounded like questions. Maya stood perfectly still, understanding that this was some kind of formal assessment of who she was and what role she had played in Ketu's recovery. Finally, the elderly woman approached Maya directly. Up close, Maya could see the incredible detail in the woman's traditional tattoos and jewelry. Every piece seemed to tell a story or represent some aspect of their culture. The woman's eyes were sharp and intelligent, and Maya felt like she was being evaluated not just as a person, but as someone who might understand and respect their ways. Behind the woman and Ketu, Maya could see the rest of the tribe arranging themselves in what appeared to be a ceremonial formation. They carried woven baskets, carved wooden items, and bundles wrapped in traditional cloth. Children peeked out from behind their parents, curious about this foreign woman they had heard about but never seen. What struck Maya most was the variety of ages represented in the group. There were tiny children who couldn't have been more than 3 or 4 years old, teenagers who looked strong and capable, adults in their prime, and elderly individuals whose weathered faces spoke of decades of wisdom and experience. This wasn't just a delegation. It was an entire community that had made the difficult journey down from the high mountains. Maya noticed that several of the tribe members carried what appeared to be musical instruments, flutes made from bamboo, small drums with intricate painted designs, and stringed instruments she didn't recognize. The presence of these instruments suggested they had come prepared for some kind of ceremony or celebration, not just a simple visit. The elderly woman spoke to Ketu again, and he nodded respectfully before approaching Maya. His English had improved during his recovery, but he still spoke slowly and carefully, choosing each word with precision. "This is Grandmother Nima," Ketu said, gesturing toward the elderly woman. "She leads our people. She came to meet the healer who saved my life." Maya felt overwhelmed by the significance of what was happening. Not only had Ketu survived his journey home, but he had convinced his entire tribe to undertake what must have been a dangerous and difficult journey to meet her. The fact that their leader, this dignified woman called Grandmother Nima, had personally come to see her was an honor Maya couldn't fully comprehend. Grandmother Nima stepped closer to Maya and spoke in her tribal language. Her voice was strong. Despite her age, and although Maya couldn't understand the words, the tone conveyed respect and gratitude. Ketu translated in simple English, "She says you gave life back to our future. She wants to thank you properly as our people have always done." Maya realized that what she was witnessing was the beginning of something far more significant than a simple thank you visit. The formal way the tribe had arranged themselves, the presence of their most important leader, and the ceremonial items they carried all suggested that they had come to perform some kind of traditional ritual of gratitude that was probably sacred to their culture. What happened next changed Maya's understanding of human connection forever. Grandmother Nima raised her weathered hand, and immediately the entire tribe fell silent. The only sounds were the gentle rustling of leaves and distant bird calls from the mountain forest. Maya felt the weight of dozens of eyes watching her, but instead of feeling uncomfortable, she sensed a profound respect that made her feel honored beyond words. Grandmother Nima began speaking in the tribal language, her voice carrying across the clearing with remarkable strength for someone her age. Though Maya couldn't understand the words, the rhythm and tone reminded her of prayers or blessings she had heard in different cultures around the world. The elderly woman's voice rose and fell like music, and Maya noticed that other tribe members occasionally responded with what sounded like traditional responses or affirmations. As Grandmother Nima spoke, 2 younger women approached carrying an incredibly beautiful shawl. Maya had never seen anything like it. The fabric appeared to be hand-woven from the finest materials, with patterns that seemed to tell stories. Deep blues swirled together with rich greens and golden yellows, creating designs that looked like mountains, rivers, and animals. The craftsmanship was extraordinary, clearly representing months or even years of careful work. The ceremony continued as Grandmother Nima carefully placed the ceremonial shawl around Maya's shoulders. The fabric felt incredibly soft against her skin, and she could smell the faint scent of mountain herbs that had been woven into the fibers. As the shawl settled around her, the entire tribe made a low humming sound that seemed to vibrate through the ground beneath Maya's feet. Ketu stepped forward to translate, his voice filled with emotion. "Grandmother Nima says you are now part of our family. This shawl belonged to her grandmother and her grandmother before that. It has been passed down for 7 generations, only given to those who saved the life of our people." Maya felt tears welling up in her eyes as she realized the incredible honor being bestowed upon her. This wasn't just a thank you gift. It was acceptance into a family and culture that had existed in these mountains for centuries. The weight of the shawl felt symbolic of the responsibility and connection she was now being offered, but the ceremony was far from over. Grandmother Nima gestured to the rest of the tribe, and they began arranging their gifts in a large circle around Maya. The organization was clearly practiced, as if this type of ceremony was an important part of their cultural traditions. Children helped their parents arrange baskets and bundles, while the teenagers assisted the elderly in displaying carved wooden items. Maya watched in amazement as the gifts were revealed. There were medicinal plants she had never seen before, carefully preserved and labeled with small pieces of carved wood that probably indicated their uses. Intricately carved healing tools made from different types of wood and stone were arranged, alongside traditional remedies that had been prepared according to recipes passed down through generations. One of the most impressive gifts was a collection of healing instruments that appeared to be centuries old. Mao recognized some tools that looked similar to acupuncture needles, but made from materials and in designs she had never encountered. There were also carved wooden cups for measuring herbs, stone mortar for grinding medicines, and metal tools that had been crafted with incredible precision despite being made without modern technology. Ketu explained each category of gifts as they were displayed. These plants grow only in the highest mountains where the air is thin and the soil is special. My people have used them for healing for more generations than we can count. Grandmother Nima wants you to have them so you can help more people. As Maya examined the medicinal plants more closely, she realized she was looking at what could be revolutionary discoveries for modern medicine. Some of the herbs had properties she could only guess at, while others showed characteristics that might be completely unknown to pharmaceutical science. The potential for helping patients with these traditional remedies was enormous, but perhaps the most meaningful gift came when Ketu approached carrying a small wooden box carved from what appeared to be a single piece of rare mountain timber. Inside the box, nestled in soft fabric, was a pendant similar to his own jade piece, but smaller and with different carved symbols. The green stone caught the afternoon light, revealing intricate details that seemed to shift and change as Maya looked at them from different angles. This pendant was made by our finest craftsmen, Ketu explained. The symbols carved into it represent protection, healing, and connection to our people. Wearing it means you can call on our tribe for help, no matter where you are or what you need. Grandmother Nima gestured for Maya to kneel, and when she did, the elderly woman placed the pendant around her neck with hands that were surprisingly steady despite her age. As the jade touched Maya's skin, the entire tribe began a harmonious chant that seemed to make the very air around them vibrate with positive energy. The chanting continued for several minutes, with different voices joining and leaving the harmony in patterns that created an incredibly complex and beautiful musical experience. Maya had never heard anything like it. The sound seemed to connect her not just to the people around her, but to the mountains, the forest, and the ancient traditions that had shaped this culture for countless generations. When the chanting ended, Grandmother Nima placed her hands on Maya's face in a gesture that was clearly significant in their culture. The elderly woman's eyes were filled with tears, and when she spoke, her voice carried an emotion that transcended language barriers. Ketu translated with obvious difficulty, struggling to find English words for concepts that probably didn't exist outside his culture. She says you gave life back to our future leader. Without you, our people would have lost their way. She asks the mountain spirits to protect you always, and promises that our tribe will be your family for as long as the mountains stand. Maya learned that Ketu wasn't just any tribe member. He was Grandmother Nima's grandson and the chosen successor to lead their people. His injury and disappearance had created a crisis that threatened the stability of their entire community. By saving his life, Maya had prevented what could have been the end of their traditional way of life. The revelation explained so much about why the entire tribe had made this dangerous journey to meet her. In their culture, saving the life of a future leader created bonds of obligation and gratitude that extended to the entire community. Maya hadn't just helped one person. She had preserved the future of an entire civilization. As the formal ceremony concluded, the atmosphere became more relaxed and celebratory. Children who had been standing quietly with their parents began playing around the edges of the gathering. Adults started conversations in small groups, and Maya found herself surrounded by tribe members who wanted to meet her personally. Despite the language barriers, Maya discovered that curiosity and kindness were universal languages. The tribe members showed genuine interest in her work as a healer, examining her medical equipment with fascination and sharing stories about their own healing traditions through gestures and basic words. Over the next 3 days, the tribe remained camped near Maya's clinic, creating a temporary village that transformed the normally quiet mountain clearing into a bustling community. Maya learned more about traditional medicine in those 3 days than she had in her entire medical training. She also gained a family that would remain connected to her for the rest of her life. When the tribe finally prepared to return to their mountain home, Maya understood that she had been part of something far greater than a simple rescue. She had witnessed the power of human compassion to create bonds that transcended every barrier: language, culture, nationality, and tradition. The jade pendant around her neck would forever remind her that kindness, once given freely, returns in ways more beautiful and profound than anyone could ever imagine.